HFY approved the subjugation order for Earth between his second and third meal rotation. He did not linger on it. The file was thin, a pre-galactic species, fractured into nearly 200 separate governance structures, no unified military command, still burning fossil carbon for energy. Category 2. Barely worth the fuel cost of a full space jump. He stamped the authorization with one foreclaw and moved on to a territorial dispute near the Keth Nebula that actually required his attention. 900 species had received the same file stamp. 900 species had surrendered within the 6-hour compliance window, most within the first 2. The Velthari Dominion did not conquer through cruelty. It conquered through procedure. The broadcast went out in every identified language of the target world. The terms were simple. Disarm, submit governing authority to the regional Dominion overseer, provide resource allocation data, resist, and corrective kinetic action would follow. It was, in every functional sense, paperwork. 12,000 light-years away, Danny Coyle was on his back under a 2004 Chevy Silverado with a rust problem and an owner who lied about the rust problem. The wrench in his hand was a 20mm socket, the wrong size for the bolt he was fighting, but he was too deep under the truck to care. Tulsa in September meant the concrete was still warm enough to burn through his shirt. The radio on the workbench played something with too much guitar. The light changed first, not like a cloud passing, more like someone had adjusted the color settings on the whole sky. The air went from white-yellow to a blue so deep it looked like the atmosphere had bruised. Danny rolled out from under the truck. The wrench stayed in his hand. His fist would not open around it. Above Tulsa, above everywhere, the sky held something that should not have been there. Hundreds of them. Dark and angular, and so large they made the clouds look like set decoration. They did not move the way airplanes moved. They were just there, the way mountains were there, as if they had always existed and everyone had simply failed to look up. The broadcast hit every frequency on the planet at the same time. Every phone, every radio, every television, every emergency band. It came in English, Mandarin, Arabic, Spanish, Hindi, all of them simultaneously, layered on top of each other like a choir, singing different songs in the same key. The words were polite. The meaning was not. Surrender. 6 hours. Across the continent, in a windowless monitoring room 60 feet below Colorado Springs, Grace Dunlap heard the broadcast through her headset and did not remove it. Her hands shook, a full-body tremor that started in her wrists and climbed up to her shoulders. But her fingers kept moving on the keyboard. She was a data person. Terrifying, world-ending, impossible data. But data all the same. She started recording, isolating frequencies, mapping signal origin points. Somewhere behind her, a colleague was crying. Someone else was on the phone, saying, "I love you," over and over to someone who might not have picked up. Grace mapped signal decay rates and pretended her hands were steady. The 6 hours passed like a held breath. World governments did what world governments do when confronted with the impossible. They argued. The Security Council convened and achieved nothing. The Americans wanted to fight. The Russians wanted to negotiate. China went silent for 90 minutes and then issued a statement so vague it could have meant anything. France proposed a unified response. Nobody unified. A senator from Texas went on cable news and suggested nuking the fleet, which would have been funnier if he had not been entirely serious. No single voice said "we surrender," because no single voice could. 8 billion people spread across 195 countries with 1,000 years of disagreements baked into every border. The Velthari had sent their demand to a species that could not agree on a calendar system, let alone a coordinated capitulation. The deadline passed. Earth did not surrender. Earth did not do anything. It simply failed to comply, the way a river fails to comply with a dam by just being a river. AliveHFY received the non-compliance notification during his evening review. He paused, not from concern, from genuine confusion. He checked the historical database. 900 subjugations, 0 non-compliances past the deadline, not one. He ran a diagnostic on the communication array, certain the broadcast had malfunctioned. It had not. The humans had received the message, understood the message, and then done nothing about it. Reth blinked his 4 eyes in a slow cascade, the Veltari equivalent of a frown, and authorized standard corrective protocol. Kinetic strikes, 12 cities, not to destroy, to demonstrate. The math was simple. Calculate population density, identify 12 urban centers distributed across major landmasses. Deploy kinetic impactors at sufficient yield to eliminate each target zone while leaving surrounding infrastructure intact. The strikes were not punishment, they were punctuation, a firm period at the end of a sentence the humans had apparently failed to read. The rods fell at 17 times the speed of sound. Danny Coyle saw the light before anything else. He was standing in a gas station parking lot outside Tulsa, still holding the wrench, staring east toward a horizon that had been flat and orange 2 seconds ago. The column of light that rose from where Oklahoma City had been was perfectly vertical, white at the center, blue at the edges. It climbed and climbed and kept climbing, and it made no sound at all, not yet, because the sound was still traveling, still catching up to the light, still building into something that would rattle fillings and stop clocks and make dogs howl for 100 miles in every direction. Danny watched it. The gas station clerk came out and stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing in any human language built for this. No word, no prayer, no curse that covered the distance between a man holding a wrench in a parking lot and a city that had just stopped existing. 11 other columns rose around the planet in the same moment. London, Sao Paulo, Lagos, Mumbai, Shanghai. 12 pillars of light so bright they burned temporary shadows into the walls of buildings 50 miles from the impact zones. On his command ship, AliveHFY logged the strikes and added a note to the file. Corrective action administered. Expect compliance within secondary window. He moved on to the next item in his queue. Below, on a bruised and burning world, 8 billion people were not complying. They were not organizing. They were not making plans or giving speeches or rallying around flags. They were just standing in parking lots and kitchens and shelters and rubble, staring at pillars of light, feeling something old and electric and wordless settle into their spines. Not grief, not yet. 3 days after the strikes, AliveHFY expected surrender communications. His communication officers monitored every human frequency, military bands, civilian radio, satellite uplinks, even the primitive cellular networks that still functioned outside the blast zones. They found no surrender. They found no pleas. What they found was chatter. Thousands of overlapping transmissions, short range, encrypted with methods so crude the Veltari systems almost ignored them as noise. Tactical coordination, supply routes, ammunition counts, rally points. Not a single one of them was begging. Reth leaned back in his command chair and felt something he had not felt in 40 years of military service. He did not yet have a name for it. He filed it away and ordered ground troops deployed to pacify the major land masses. In Tulsa, Danny Coyle spent those 3 days digging, not metaphorically. He dug graves with a garden shovel behind a Baptist church, because the ground was soft there, and because no one had a better idea. He buried his neighbor. He buried the woman who ran the laundromat on 5th Street. He buried a man he had never met, whose driver's license said his name was Pete, and who had died holding a photograph of a dog. On the 4th day, Danny stopped digging. He walked back to his garage, sat down on an overturned bucket, and looked at his tools for a very long time. Then, he started building. It turned out that a man who could rebuild a transmission from scrap parts could also build a shaped charge from fertilizer and diesel fuel if someone showed him the chemistry. And someone did, a retired Army engineer named Lou Kaplan, who lived 3 streets over and who had spent 20 years pretending he was just a guy who liked gardening. Lou had the knowledge, Danny had the garage. Within a week, they had 6 other people and enough improvised explosives to make a small parking lot very unhappy. Veterans found them first, then hunters, then electricians and plumbers, and a 19-year-old kid who worked at a cell phone store and turned out to be a genius at building signal jammers from old routers. They did not call themselves a resistance. They did not have meetings or salute or give speeches. They just showed up at Danny's garage every morning and asked what needed doing. Danny never volunteered to lead. He just kept not dying, and people followed that. 600 miles east, Grace Dunlap had not slept in 5 days, and had stopped pretending she might. The NOAA facility under Colorado Springs was never designed as a military installation, but it had power, it had satellite access, and it had Grace, which turned out to be enough. She had isolated the Velthari communication frequency on day 1. By day 5, she understood its structure. The aliens communicated in hierarchical data bursts. One central node transmitted. Thousands of soldiers received. Orders flowed in one direction, down. There was no debate, no feedback loop, no individual interpretation. A Velthari squad received a command and executed it with the precision of fingers obeying a brain. Cut the nerve, and the fingers stopped. Grace stared at her screen and understood something enormous. "They don't think for themselves," she said to the empty room. "Not a single one of them." She wrote up her findings in a 4-page report and began looking for someone with enough authority left alive to read it. Kevin Marsh had authority, though calling it that felt generous. The Secretary of Defense was operating out of a converted coal mine in West Virginia, with a satellite phone that worked every 3rd attempt, and a staff of 11 people who had survived mostly by being underground when the strikes hit. He had not changed his shirt in 6 days. He had smoked 4 packs of cigarettes in the same period, and felt no particular guilt about this. The world was ending. Lung cancer had dropped several places on his list of concerns. His first order was broadcast on every surviving military frequency, and it was the shortest strategic directive in American history. Operate independently. Trust your judgment. Make them pay for every mile. He did not know if anyone heard it. He sent it anyway. Someone heard it. The first real victory happened outside of Memphis. A squad of Veltari ground troops, 8-foot insectoid soldiers with natural body armor and venom glands in their forelimbs, marched through a suburban neighborhood in standard pacification formation. A group of 11 humans, armed with hunting rifles and 2 of Danny's improvised charges, hit them from 3 directions simultaneously. It should not have worked. The Veltari were faster, tougher, and equipped with energy weapons that could cut through a car door like wet paper. But something strange happened. When the first explosive detonated and severed the squad's communication relay, a small antenna mounted on the squad leader's dorsal plate. The remaining soldiers stopped. Not retreated, stopped. They stood perfectly still in the middle of the street, weapons half raised, like machines waiting for input that would never come. The humans stared at them for about 4 seconds. Then they did what humans do, not through military channels or government broadcasts, but through whispered conversations, hand-copied notes, shortwave radio, and a 19-year-old girl in Baton Rouge who had started writing things down. Maggie Stoll had been in a community college lecture on American history when the sky changed color. She had been in a relief shelter when the strikes hit. She had spent 2 weeks eating canned corn and sleeping on a gym floor and listening to people cry in the dark. On day 15, She stole a notebook from a supply crate and started writing. Not news, not propaganda, just truths wrapped in humor dark enough to taste like copper. She wrote about the man in the shelter who organized a poker tournament with cards made from torn cereal boxes. She wrote about the woman who climbed to the roof every morning and yelled insults at the alien ships in fluent French. She wrote survival tips between the jokes: how to purify water, how to treat burns, which plants in a Louisiana ditch were edible, and which would make a person wish they were not. She called it Still Here. She signed off every edition the same way: see you tomorrow, assuming tomorrow shows up. People copied it by hand. Then someone rigged a shortwave transmitter, and Maggie's voice, young, tired, sharp as a box cutter, started reaching other shelters, other states, other people who had stopped believing anyone was coming to save them, and needed someone to remind them they could save themselves. AliveHFY received his first anomalous casualty report on day 23 of the occupation. Veltari losses in ground engagements were 400% above the projected model. 400%. He read the number 3 times. He queried the Dominion's database of 900 prior subjugations for comparable figures. No match found. He requested helmet cam footage from a ground engagement in the southern region of the largest continent. The footage showed a single human, female, injured, dragging her left leg at an angle that meant the knee was finished, crawling through the wreckage of a fuel depot toward a Veltari supply node. She was carrying something in her right hand. A device, homemade, wires and a battery, and a glass jar full of something dark. She reached the supply node. She did not hesitate. The explosion took out the node, the surrounding equipment, and everything within 30 meters. Reth's aide, standing beside him, watched the footage in silence. Then he asked, "Was that a soldier?" Reth checked the human's identification file, pulled from a recovered data device found on a body near the blast. "She was a math teacher," he said. His aide said nothing. AliveHFY sat in his chair on his ship, above a world he had expected to conquer between meals, and he felt that unnamed feeling again. It was stronger now. It sat in his thorax like something swallowed wrong. He would learn its name soon enough. Grace Dunlap stood in front of Kevin Marsh in a coal mine 200 feet below West Virginia and explained how to break an empire with a radio signal. The relay system, she told him, that was the spine of the whole thing. Every Veltari soldier on the ground, every pilot in orbit, every commander on every ship, they were all connected to sector relay nodes. One mind transmitted, thousands obeyed. It was efficient, it was elegant, it was the single greatest military vulnerability she had ever seen in any system, biological or mechanical. "If we destroy a sector relay node," she said, "every Veltari soldier linked to it goes catatonic. Not confused, not disoriented, catatonic. Complete neural shutdown. 90 seconds of total system failure before backup protocols kick in and they reboot from a neighboring node." Marsh sat on a folding chair in a room that smelled like diesel and damp stone. He had a cigarette between his fingers that had burned down to the filter without him noticing. He looked at Grace for a long time. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had slept 9 hours in the past 2 weeks, and who carried the names of 12 dead cities behind them like stones in his pockets. 90 seconds, he said. 90 seconds. That's not a weakness, Grace. He dropped the dead cigarette on the floor. That's a kill switch. The order went out that night on every frequency Marsh could reach. Target the relay nodes. Hit them with everything. The moment a node goes dark, you have 90 seconds to kill every Veltari soldier in the area before they wake back up. Not 91. Danny Coyle received the order through a chain of 7 people that started at a military base in Virginia and ended with a teenager on a bicycle who pedaled 40 miles through Veltari patrol territory to deliver a handwritten note to his garage. Danny read it twice, folded it into his shirt pocket, and looked at the 53 people sitting on the floor of his shop, between racks of tools and engine parts. "We need to find a relay node," he said. They found one 19 miles north of Tulsa, mounted on the roof of a converted shopping mall that the Veltari had turned into a regional command post. It was guarded by 200 soldiers, an energy shield perimeter, and a pair of aerial drones that could see a rabbit from 8,000 feet. Danny's people had hunting rifles, homemade explosives, and a kid from a cell phone store who could jam any signal within a quarter mile if given 3 car batteries and an hour. The numbers were not good. Danny knew the numbers were not good. He also knew that math had stopped mattering about 6 weeks ago. They hit the node at 4 in the morning. The cell phone kid, his name was Tyler. He was 22. He had been enrolled in an online IT program before the world changed, knocked out the drone communication link with a jamming burst that sounded like a microwave having a seizure. The drones drifted in wide, stupid circles, blind and deaf. Danny's 2 best shooters took them down with deer rifles from 300 yards. Then the charges went off against the mall's east wall, and Danny's people poured through the gap with weapons that had no business being pointed at an alien empire, and did it anyway. The relay node was on the 3rd floor. Lou Kaplan, the retired engineer, 61 years old, bad hip, steadiest hands Danny had ever seen, placed the charges himself. The explosion was small and precise, and it cracked the node open like an egg. Every Veltari soldier in the building dropped. Not fell, dropped. Mid-step, mid-reach, mid-breath. 200 insectoid soldiers collapsed to the floor in the same instant, weapons clattering, limbs folding under them like puppets with cut strings. The silence that followed was so total that Danny could hear his own heartbeat in his ears and the ticking of a fluorescent light that somehow still worked. 90 seconds. His people moved through the building like water through a cracked dam. It was not heroic. It was not clean. It was ugly and fast and necessary. And when the 90 seconds ended, there was not a single functioning Veltari soldier left in the mall. Danny stood in the parking lot afterward. His hands were shaking. Not his fingers, his whole hands. Lou Kaplan sat on the curb next to him and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "Same time tomorrow?" And Danny laughed, a single broken sound like a cough, and nodded. Similar operations unfolded across every continent. Grace's intelligence spread like fire through the fragmented human resistance. Where military units survived, they struck with precision. Where civilians had organized, they struck with whatever they had. The method was always the same. Find the node. Kill the node. Use the 90 seconds. The Veltari began losing ground for the first time in their imperial history. In orbit, Cody Voss was about to make things worse for them. Commander Voss had spent 6 weeks hiding what remained of the Pacific Fleet in deep water. 3 destroyers, 2 submarines, a carrier with half its aircraft gone, and a flight deck that listed 4 degrees to port from a near-miss kinetic strike. It was not a fleet. It was a grudge with a hull number. Grace's data had revealed something else. The Veltari orbital supply chain depended on automated transport ships that dropped from the main fleet to the surface on regular schedules. Those transports were unarmored. They relied on the fleet's point defense grid for protection, and that grid had a gap. A 6-minute window during each planetary rotation, where atmospheric interference from the Southern Ocean degraded targeting sensors by 40%. 40% was enough. Voss repositioned his submarines under the Southern Ocean and loaded them with the last nuclear warheads in the American arsenal. The plan was to launch from depth during the 6-minute window, punch through the degraded sensor grid, and hit the transport ships before they could reach the safety of the fleet. His executive officer, a woman named Katie Briggs, who had been a logistics specialist before the world required her to be something harder, ran the survival projections, and put them on his desk, without comment. Voss read them. He folded the paper once, and put it in his pocket. The survival projections were not good. The survival projections had stopped mattering about 6 weeks ago. He gave the order at 03:47 hours on a Tuesday. 12 warheads climbed from the black water of the Southern Ocean and rose through 6 miles of atmosphere and into the orbital transport lane like bright fists thrown upward by a planet that had decided it was done being hit. 9 connected. 3 Velthari transport ships broke apart in orbit. A 4th, damaged and trailing debris, spun into the atmosphere and burned a white line across the southern sky that people in New Zealand watched from their rooftops in silence. The orbital supply chain collapsed. No more reinforcements to the surface. No more equipment. No more replacement relay nodes. The Velthari on the ground were cut off. In Memphis, Nate Harmon was performing his 103rd surgery. A woman with shrapnel in her shoulder, laid out on a table that used to belong to a barbecue restaurant. His headlamp flickered. His hands did not. He had started keeping count on his left forearm in black Sharpie on the first day. A simple tally, 1 mark per person he kept alive. The marks ran from his wrist to his elbow now, small and tight and precise. 103. He finished the surgery. He cleaned his instruments. He did not add a mark. Not because he had failed, because his forearm was full, and he could not bring himself to start on the other arm. What that meant, the weight of it, the quiet admission that the count had grown beyond what one arm could hold, was something he did not look at directly. He just cleaned his instruments and called for the next patient. On his command ship, HFY watched the supply chain burn and opened his personal log. He had been reading human history for weeks now. Stalingrad, the tunnels of Kuchi, a pass in Greece where 300 soldiers held a line against an empire and did not survive and did not care. He typed a single sentence to Dominion High Command, classified at the highest level. We have made a classification error of existential magnitude. He closed the log. No one responded. Below on the surface, in a field hospital, and a parking lot, and a coal mine, and a Baton Rouge shelter, where a girl with a sharp voice signed off the same way every night. Humans kept doing the thing that no species in the galactic record had ever done. The reinforcement fleet arrived on a Wednesday. 342 ships folded out of compressed space above Earth in a wave that blotted out the stars for 6 seconds. The new fleet was 3 times the size of the original. Warships this time, not transports, built for one purpose and not shy about it. The Dominion had stopped sending paperwork. They had sent an answer. HFY was reassigned within the hour. His new title was Advisory Consultant, which in Velthari military structure meant the same thing it meant in every military structure in the galaxy. You have been removed from command without anyone saying so out loud. His replacement was a fleet commander named Sek Vorin, who had overseen 37 successful subjugations, and who regarded Earth the way a surgeon regards an infected nail. Unpleasant, routine, beneath his talent, but requiring removal nonetheless. Vorin's first order was to recall all surviving ground troops to orbit. His second order was to deploy the canisters. Grace Dunlap was the first human to understand what the canisters were. She intercepted the deployment order through the communication monitoring system she had built in the Colorado Springs facility. She decoded it in 11 minutes. Then she sat at her desk and did not move for a very long time. The canisters contained a biogenic pathogen, a living agent engineered to bond with mammalian neural tissue and dissolve it. Not kill the body, dissolve the brain. The organism would spread through air, through water, through skin contact. Once released into Earth's atmosphere, it would reach global saturation within 90 days. Every mammal on the planet, Every human, every dog, every whale, every bat, every child would be dead within 4 months. Not from violence, from chemistry. Grace pulled the Dominion's historical files on the pathogen. It had been deployed 6 times before. 6 species had received the canisters. Those 6 species no longer existed. Their worlds were listed in the Dominion database as resource available, biologically cleared. She called Kevin Marsh on the satellite phone. It took 4 tries to connect. "Kevin," she said, and her voice was steady because she had decided it would be. "They're going to kill all of us. Not the cities, not the armies, all of us, every mammal on the planet. I need you to listen to what I'm about to say next." Marsh listened. He lit a cigarette while she talked. He did not interrupt. What Grace proposed was this. She had spent weeks studying the Velthari relay system. She understood it well enough now to do more than just disrupt individual nodes. She could build a feedback pulse, a weaponized signal broadcast through the relay network itself, that would cascade through every connected Velthari mind in range, and overload their neural architecture. Not kill them. Worse. It would burn out their higher cognitive function. Every Veltari within relay range, the entire solar system, would be rendered vegetative. Conscious but empty. Alive but gone. Millions of sentient beings, erased from the inside out. "Will it reach their homeworld?" Marsh asked. "No. Local relay range only. The solar system. Nothing beyond." "How long do you need?" "I need a ground-based relay amplifier operational for 11 minutes. The one outside Tulsa is the closest to functional. I can transmit the pulse from here, but the amplifier has to be broadcasting for it to reach full cascade range." "And if they drop the canisters before you're ready?" Grace did not answer that. The silence was the answer. Marsh sat in the mineshaft. He smoked the cigarette down to the filter. He looked at the stone ceiling above him, and at the 11 people in the room who were pretending not to listen, and who had heard every word. "Do it," he said. No speech, no moral framework offered to the room, no dramatic pause. He said it the way a man says, "Pass the salt," because the alternative to salt was the extinction of his species, and there was nothing left to deliberate. Then he sat there and finished his cigarette, and nobody in the room spoke to him, and he did not speak to them. The order reached Danny Coyle through the same chain of whispered relays and bicycle couriers that had carried every other order. "Protect the amplifier outside Tulsa. Keep it broadcasting for 11 minutes, whatever it takes." Danny read the note. He looked at the 46 people in his garage. Some of them were soldiers. Most of them were not. The youngest was Tyler, the cell phone kid, 22. The oldest was Lou Kaplan, 61, bad hip, steady hands. Danny did not explain what the 11 minutes were for. He just said they had to hold a position for 11 minutes and that it would be bad. Lou looked at him and said, "Worse than last time?" Danny said, "Yeah, Lou, worse than last time." Lou nodded and started packing charges. The Velthari figured out something was wrong with their relay network 6 hours before Grace was ready. The signal patterns had shifted. Data was moving in directions it should not move. Sec Vorin, who did not understand the technology as well as he believed he did, ordered a full ground assault on every known human relay position. 40,000 Velthari soldiers dropped from orbit like a rain of dark metal aimed at a dozen points across the planet. The amplifier outside Tulsa was the primary target. Danny's 46 people dug in around the amplifier station, a squat concrete building that used to be a water treatment facility, and waited. They had shaped charges. They had 3 signal jammers built by Tyler from car batteries and scrap electronics. They had 11 minutes to survive, and no guarantee of a 12th. The Velthari hit them at dawn. The first wave came across the open ground east of the station, in a line so wide and so dense it looked like the earth itself was moving. Danny's people opened fire, and the line did not slow. They detonated the first ring of charges, and the line staggered and reformed, and kept coming. Tyler's jammers knocked out 2 Velthari squad relays, and the soldiers in those squads dropped, but there were hundreds more behind them, and the jammers burned out after 3 uses each. 7 minutes in, the east wall of the station collapsed. Danny pulled his people back to the inner rooms. Lou Kaplan took a position at the gap with a shotgun and a bag of homemade grenades, and held it alone for 90 seconds that felt like 90 years. Danny was bleeding from somewhere on his head, and could not tell where. Half his people were down. The Velthari were inside the building. 10 minutes. Tyler, 22 years old, IT student, signal jammer genius, patched a severed cable on the amplifier with his bare hands, while energy bolts cracked the air around him. The amplifier held. 11 minutes. The pulse fired. Grace Dunlap, 600 miles away in a bunker under Colorado Springs, pressed a key on her keyboard and sent a signal through a network she had spent months learning to speak. And the signal said one thing, in a language the Velthari understood, in the deepest part of their connected minds. Stop. Every Velthari in the solar system went still. On the ground outside Tulsa, soldiers froze mid-stride. In orbit, warships drifted off course, engines running, no hand on the wheel. On 342 ships, crews collapsed at their stations. The reinforcement fleet became a graveyard of metal and silence, hanging above a world it had come to erase. In the amplifier station, Danny Coyle lay on the floor surrounded by dust and blood and the sound of nothing. The nothing was so loud it hurt. He turned his head and counted the people still breathing. 9 out of 46. Lou Kaplan was not among them. On the command ship, on a bridge full of catatonic officers, slumped over consoles they would never touch again, one Velthari was still conscious. Reth Ovari, who had spent weeks studying human independence, who had begun running his own mind on partial autonomous mode out of academic curiosity, who had done the one thing no Velthari was supposed to do and thought for himself, sat in the silence and breathed. He was alone, the only Velthari officer awake in the entire solar system. He opened a communication channel to Earth. The frequency crackled. Someone picked up. Kevin Marsh, voice like gravel filtered through ash. Reth did not speak for a long time. Then, "You understand what you have done?" And Marsh, sitting in a coal mine under West Virginia, cigarette burned down to nothing between his fingers, "Yeah." Neither of them said anything after that. The channel stayed open. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of something that had no name in either of their languages. The shared weight of a line crossed that could not be uncrossed. A door shut that had no handle on the other side. Somewhere in Baton Rouge, Maggie Stoll's voice came through on shortwave, thin and steady, reading off the names of places that were still standing. "See you tomorrow," she said, assuming tomorrow shows up. Tomorrow had shown up. It just looked different than anyone had hoped. 6 months after the pulse, the grass started coming back in the blast zones. Not everywhere, not evenly, but green things pushed through black soil in patches that spread a little wider each week. And people who had stopped noticing anything beautiful for a very long time found themselves standing at the edges of the dead zones, watching the grass grow, and not saying much about it. Earth was scarred. 12 cities were gone, and would stay gone. The land where they had been was smooth and flat and faintly warm, and no one had decided yet what to do with it. Some people wanted memorials. Some people wanted silence. Some people wanted to build something new on top of the old, because that was the only direction left to go. Nobody agreed. Nobody was expected to. Agreement had never been humanity's strong point, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that this was not a flaw. The Velthari Dominion had retreated. For the first time in its 3,000-year imperial history, the Dominion pulled its borders inward. The expeditionary fleet, all 342 ships, drifted in Earth's orbit like dead leaves on a pond. No crew awake to fly them. No commands coming from a homeworld that had received HFY's classified report and gone very, very quiet. Other galactic powers noticed. The Kalmari Trade Collective, the Duan Federation, the Singing Courts of Oreth. Species that had lived under the Dominion's shadow for centuries felt the shadow shrink and looked toward a small blue planet in an unfashionable arm of the galaxy and wondered what kind of species lived there. The answer unsettled them more than the Dominion ever had. HFY stayed. Nobody asked him to. The last conscious Velthari in the solar system moved into a repurposed cabin on his command ship and established himself as an unofficial liaison between Earth and the wider galaxy. He ate alone. He worked alone. He maintained the communication arrays and translated diplomatic inquiries and answered the same question over and over from alien ambassadors who contacted him through back channels. "What are they?" they asked. He never gave the same answer twice because he had not finished figuring it out. A human diplomat named Penny Aldrich was assigned to work with him. She was 54, former State Department, had survived the occupation in a basement in Arlington, eating canned soup for 4 months. She was polite and direct, and did not pretend to like Reth, which he respected. During their third meeting, she asked why he had stayed. Reth considered the question for a long time. His 4 eyes blinked in their slow cascade. "I need to understand you," he said, "before someone else fails to." Penny looked at him and nodded once, and they went back to work. And something that was not yet friendship, but might become it, settled into the space between them, like a cat choosing a chair. Danny Coyle went home to Tulsa. His garage was still standing. The roof had a new hole from a piece of debris that had come through during the final battle, and rain had warped the plywood shelf where he kept his socket sets. But the walls were up, and the lights worked, and the air still smelled like motor oil and old concrete. He started fixing cars again. People brought them. The same people who had always brought them. Neighbors, friends of neighbors, strangers who heard about the mechanic on Elm Street who did honest work for fair prices. They also brought casseroles and six-packs and questions they did not actually ask. They looked at Danny and at the photo pinned above his workbench, and they understood that some questions had no good answers, and that a man who spent 9 months keeping people alive in a war against an alien empire might prefer to talk about transmissions. The photo showed 37 faces, some smiling, some not. Lou Kaplan was in the back row, squinting, his bad hip cocked to one side. When people asked about the photo, Danny said, "People I know." He used the present tense. Nobody corrected him. Grace Dunlap did something that changed the galaxy more than the Pulse ever did. She published it. Every technical specification, every frequency map, every line of code that made the relay pulse work. She packaged it into a single data file and broadcast it on an open galactic frequency that any species with a basic receiver could pick up. No encryption, no restrictions, no price. Attached was a message she wrote herself. It was 3 sentences long. "This is the weapon we used. We would prefer not to use it again. Please do not make us prefer differently." It was downloaded 14 billion times in the first 6 hours. She was young and persistent, and had driven 7 hours on a dirt road to reach him. He let her in because she looked cold, and because he had made too much coffee. She asked one question. "Do you regret it?" Marsh looked at his hands. They were the same hands that had held the cigarette when he said, "Do it." They looked no different. He did not know why he expected them to. "Every morning," he said. The journalist paused. Then she asked, "Would you do it again?" Marsh looked at her for a long time. The same words came out, and they weighed twice as much. "Every morning." She did not ask another question. She finished her coffee and left. The article she wrote was short, and she let his words stand without commentary, because commentary would have made them smaller. Maggie Stoll, never stopped broadcasting. Still Here grew from a shortwave signal in Baton Rouge to Earth's first interstellar media outlet. She learned to operate equipment that had been built by species she could not pronounce. She still signed off the same way every night, and her voice still sounded the way it had always sounded, young and tired and sharp enough to cut glass. Other species started listening, not for the news. They had their own news. They listened for her voice, for the particular way a human woman from Louisiana could make the end of a broadcast sound like a promise. A Kelmari trade captain later said that hearing Maggie Stahl sign off for the first time was the moment he understood why the Velthari had lost. Cody Voss was given command of humanity's first purpose-built interstellar vessel. It was constructed in orbit from a combination of human engineering and salvaged Velthari technology, and it was ugly in the way that functional things are ugly. All angles and purpose, and no apology for either. Voss chose it himself. He named it the Still Here. Maggie found out during the launch broadcast. She was on air when someone handed her a note. She read it. She did not cry. She went quiet for about 4 seconds, which anyone who had ever listened to her knew was the same thing. Then she kept talking, because that was what she did. Nate Harmon opened a clinic in Memphis. It was small, 2 examination rooms, a waiting area with chairs that did not match, and a reception desk built from a repurposed church pew. Above the front door, in small hand-painted letters, it read, 103 and counting. He started a new tally on his right forearm. The first mark went on the day he opened the doors. The Galactic Council formally classified humanity 6 months after first contact. The file was short. It contained a single recommendation that translated roughly into every language in the network. Do not engage, do not provoke, do not assume they are bluffing. They are not a Category 2 species. They are not any category. File accordingly. Rethovari added a personal annotation, 1 sentence. It was the most cited line in galactic diplomatic literature for the next 300 years. They are the only species I have encountered that fights hardest when it has the least reason to believe it will win. On a warm Tuesday evening in Tulsa, 6 months and 4 days after the world almost ended, Danny Coyle lay on his back under a Ford pickup with a transmission problem and an owner who swore it was fine. The radio on his workbench played Maggie Stoll's broadcast. She was reading off a list of new settlements being built in the blast zones, names picked by the people who live there, small names, hopeful ones. Danny reached for a wrench. His hand closed around it on the first try.